As time goes by, Slavic abstract art is becoming more and more incomprehensible. At the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the combat actions of the Russian army were confusing. So was Prigozhin's aborted loyalty operation. The performance of the Ukrainian side is also not inferior. The so-called X-season counterattacks are getting worse and worse each time. Now, there is a situation where the battle situation is better when there is no counterattack. Once there is a counterattack, it instead promotes the Russian army's advance in eastern Ukraine. Against this background, Ukraine suddenly launched a counterattack on Russian territory, which is shocking in this battle. The operations of the two East Slavic brothers can be called the culmination of abstract art, facing the unprecedented attack on its territory by Ukraine. The main force of the Russian army continued to advance in Donetsk as if nothing had happened, without any sign of rushing to aid the homeland. After continuously adding fuel, the Ukrainian army lost its initial rapid offensive momentum in just a few days and instead dug temporary defensive fortifications in Russian territory. All these situations have left people who are well informed and have seen a lot unable to figure out what new tricks these two are playing for a while. Is it besieging way to rescue Zhao? Is it the Cheney-Yuan Treaty? Or you fight yours and I fight mine? It seems a bit like each of them. But upon closer inspection, none of them match. On August 6th, Ukraine's only mechanized troops rushed into Kursk Oblast, Russia. At the two emergency meetings chaired by Putin, Gerasimov initially reported that this Ukrainian army had only 7 tanks and 53 armored vehicles, with a scale of several hundred people. Later, the battle report was changed to say that there were about 1,000 to 2,000 Ukrainian troops. And in the first few days of the battle, the Ukrainian army had 315 casualties and at least 100 people were killed. But soon people found that the Ukrainian army's investment this time was far more than that, because more and more Ukrainian army units appeared in Kursk. There are at least 9 regular units: the 22nd, 24th, 72nd, and 88th Mechanized Brigades, the 80th and 82nd Airborne Assault Brigades, the 103rd and 150th Territorial Defense Brigades, the 14th Independent Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Combat Regiment, and some foreign volunteer legions, such as the Russian Free Army and the Georgian Legion. The total number is about 10,000 to 20,000 people. The Ukrainian side claims there are 20,000 people obviously. This time, Ukraine's Kursk battle is not a small-scale skirmish like the Russian Free Legion breaking into Belgorod last year, but a real army group-level offensive battle for the Ukrainian side in just 4 days. Ukraine used the method of reconnaissance and destruction teams to explore the way and mechanize troops to follow up. They advanced all the way and quickly occupied a considerable amount of Russian land. The Ukrainian army also intercepted the Russian support forces by means of encircling and attacking reinforcements and long-range bombing. They even used FPV to shoot down one Mi-28 and one Ka-52 helicopter of the Russian army. This has also become the first kill record of FPV against armed helicopters in modern war history. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense announced that it has occupied 1,250 square kilometers of Russian land and at least 92 settlements. On the one hand, the Ukrainian army continues to consolidate the currently occupied land, and on the other hand, it develops offensives in 3 directions at the same time. The first direction is the city of Krenivio in the west. Before the war, about 6,000 people lived here, and there are no permanent and strong fortifications. The Ukrainian army occupied most of the eastern part of the town and gradually advanced into the town. Krenivio can not only serve as a hub for the Ukrainian army to continue advancing, but also not far to the west of it is a large river in Kursk Oblast, the Seym River. Across this river, Russia had previously built 3 traffic bridges. which became important supply lines in wartime. Lying across the south of this Seym River is an area of about 670 square kilometers. About 700 Russian troops are stationed here. As Ukraine intensifies its offensive through the HIMARS rocket launcher stationed in Sumy Oblast, as well as Su-27 and MiG-29 for long-range bombing and the American-made ground-launched SDB small-diameter bomb fired by ordinary artillery. These 3 bridges have been completely destroyed. This means that the Russian army can only temporarily use pontoon bridges and ships for logistical transportation here. This piece of Russian territory in the south and more than 2,700 Russian troops are at risk of being isolated and surrounded. Of course, the destruction of the main traffic line will also slow down the Ukrainian army's main forces' southward advance speed. Which one can better overcome this difficulty between the Russian logistics and the Ukrainian army's offensive will become a key to the development of the local situation. In the middle of the front line, Lgov and Kurchatov are currently the main attack directions of the Ukrainian army. On August 18, the Ukrainian army had advanced to a town 18 kilometers south of the outskirts of Lgov. Russian journalists hosting news programs in Lgov could already hear the rumbling of artillery in the east of the front line, just 3 days after the war started. The Ukrainian army captured the important border town of Suja. Now it has become the personnel and material distribution center for this battle of Ukraine. The Ukrainian army here is attacking in the direction of Kyry and at the same time looking for an opportunity to encircle the Russian army in the middle of the front line. However, due to the overly obvious intention, they have also been strongly counterattacked by the Russian army. In a military reconnaissance operation on August 20th, the Ukrainian army dispatched 7 BTR infantry fighting vehicles. As a result, at least 4 of them were destroyed and a large number of military personnel were captured. The Ukrainian army has now adjusted its tactics and is using small unit infiltration for probing. The offensive and defensive operations between Russia and Ukraine in Kursk Oblast also began to turn into a relatively stalemated situation around the 20th in general. The early surprise attack by the Ukrainian army caught the Russian army off guard. The Russian troops supporting the areas captured by the Ukrainian army are mostly conscripts and veterans who lack actual combat experience and are volunteers. With the support of NATO's situational awareness system, the movements of these troops are known to the Ukrainian side early, although it has been nearly 3 years since the war. Russian television stations still seem to be unaware of the importance of confidentiality. The television stations are broadcasting pictures of the Russian army supporting forward through the highway without any scruples. The Ukrainian artillery units stationed in the rear could not let go of such an opportunity. Soon, the Russian single-file convoy welcomed the baptism of artillery fire. The place where the vehicles were destroyed was only a few kilometers away from the reported area. By the television station, the Russian army carried out at least 3 rounds of highway support at that time. But without exception, they suffered heavy losses. Even the infantry in a truck convoy was turned into a sieve by tens of thousands of steel balls from the HIMARS before they could get off. These videos were all filmed by the Russian side and were uploaded to the internet by many Russian enthusiastic netizens. This seems to be another lame performance by the Russian side. But the reason this time is not so surprising. First, the reason why the Russian army has made slow progress in eastern Ukraine is that most of the urban agglomerations here have been built into permanent fortifications by Ukraine. It took at least 10 years to construct them. Only then did the Russian army have to spend a lot of effort to gnaw them down bit by bit. However, there are no substantial defensive facilities in Kursk Oblast, Russia. There are no dragon teeth, no minefields, and no anti-tank trenches. This time, the Ukrainian army did send elites. Mechanized troops can gallop freely on the Great Plain. thus replicating a blitzkrieg like that of the German army in World War II. In the early stage, Russia put a lot of energy into evacuating civilians. According to Russian information, at least tens of thousands of civilians in Kursk evacuated from the local area. The evacuation process involves occupying manpower and transportation tools, which makes the Russian army's counterattack actions have to be postponed as a result. Third, different from fighting on Ukrainian territory. After all, Kursk is Russia's own territory. Heavy firepower cannot be used casually. Being cautious about taking actions for fear of endangering something else restricts the firepower output of the Russian army. However, if the Russian side is abstract, then the performance of Ukraine on the opposite side is also very abstract, and even more incomprehensible. On August 15, about 10 days after the Kursk offensive began, Ukraine lost an M140 to HIMARS. It was destroyed in Sumy Oblast, Ukraine, about 11 kilometers from Kursk Oblast and about 22 kilometers from Suja. Although carefully concealed in the forest area, it was still discovered by Russia's high-altitude drones and then accurately hit by an Iskander missile. During the day on August 16, the S-125, also known as the SAM-3 fixed air defense missile pushed to the front line by Ukraine, was found to be hit. This air defense missile has always been the standard equipment of the Ukrainian army before the war, and its losses have been very small in the nearly 3-year war. Because of its small number of equipment and fixed deployment method, it also cannot play a role on the front line. On the evening of August 16, two HIMARS were lost in the forest area in the south of Mogilitsa. Not only the Ukrainian artillery suffered, but the air defense missile troops were not much better. On August 17, the German-made Iris-T short-range air defense system launcher of the Ukrainian army and the TRML for phased array fire control radar were turned into nothing by the Iskander missile. These air defense missile troops were obviously intended to cover the actions of HIMARS and ground mechanized troops. As a result, they did not cover them, but instead gave themselves away. On August 17, the Ukrainian Patriot air defense missile battalions at 2 different locations were hit one after another. At least 7 launchers were damaged and one an MPQ-65 radar was damaged. Before being hit, the Patriots still launched 2 interceptor missiles in a dying state, but it was of no use at all. On August 18, a Ukrainian M270 long-range rocket launcher was hit. The M270 uses the same launcher as the HIMARS, and the chassis is not wheeled-tracked, so it is more expensive and has stronger trafficability. The Ukrainian army only has about 20 such equipments in its hands, which can be said to be quite rare. It can be seen that up to now, although the Russian counterattack within the territory currently completely shows no sign of being able to expel the Ukrainian troops entering the country. The counterattack launched on the Ukrainian side is effective. The Ukrainian army's fire projection, airspace security guarantee and material transportation all rely on the highway from Sumy to Kursk. The Russian aerospace forces, strategic rocket forces and artillery focus their key targets of attack on Sumy Oblast, so that in a short period of time Ukraine has lost a large number of high-value technical equipments. Ukrainian armored vehicles lost. Not only that, through infiltration and ambush tactics, the Russian army has destroyed a large number of Ukrainian armored vehicles by using drones, loitering munitions, helicopters, etc., such as Bushmaster, Stryker, PT-91, Challenger, Senator Roach, Hummer and so on. It can be seen that for this Kursk battle, Ukraine has put in its last strategic reserve force, which is also the last mechanized force in the hands of the Ukrainian army. Well, at this point we can talk about the most abstract problem on the Ukrainian side. What exactly are they fighting for? What is the intention of the battle? In the early stage, the Ukrainian army's offensive was fierce. At that time, Everyone thought that the Ukrainian side must carry out a rapid in-depth advance and threaten the hinterland of Kursk as deeply as possible. At that time, there was an opinion that Ukraine wanted to cut off the oil and gas pipelines passing through Ukraine within Kursk Oblast, but this is actually not valid. To cut off the natural gas pipeline, the Ukrainian side only needs to turn off the valve on its own territory. There is also an opinion that Ukraine wants to occupy the nuclear power plant in Kursk Oblast and use it as a threat to force Russia at the negotiating table to make concessions. The nuclear power plant is located in Kursk, 40 kilometers west of Kursk city. This nuclear power plant was put into use in 1977. At present, there are 2 units in operation, however. Not to mention that the United States behind it is always unusually timid on nuclear issues. Just talking about the ability of the Ukrainian side. It is not so realistic to achieve this goal now. On August 22nd, the Russian side announced that the nuclear power plant had been attacked by drones. Due to sufficient preparations in advance, the drones were successfully intercepted. Igor Korpankovy, the mayor of Kursk city, said that the nuclear power plant is still in operation as of now. The Ukrainian side's attack on the nuclear power plant is at this level, when the Ukrainian army's offensive was going smoothly at first. It could still be said that the Kursk nuclear power plant is only 60 kilometers away from the border. But now, it should be said that there are still 60 kilometers. After more than 10 days of fighting, the offensive and defensive battles between the two sides are still centered around Suja. Judging from the current battle situation and front line, it is still a long way for the Ukrainian army to truly threaten or even occupy the Kursk nuclear power plant. As for occupying Kursk city, it is even more unrealistic. The Ukrainian army's investment of more than 20,000 people on this front line is not small. But if Kursk is the goal, it is obviously not enough. The front line of the Russia-Ukraine war is thousands of kilometers long, and the scale of troop deployment in each area cannot be the same. Using the data given by the American website Military Land and taking the area where the two sides have fought more intensely, such as Bakhmut, as a reference, it will be found that within a length of about 25 to 30 kilometers in the east of Bakhmut, the Russian army has deployed the 98th Airborne Division, the 106th Infantry Division, the 68th Armored Regiment, the 6th Cossack Motorized Infantry Regiment, and the 72nd Motorized Infantry Brigade. In total, there are 2 divisions, 2 brigades and 2 regiments, with a total of about 60,000 people. The average number of people per kilometer is 1,000 to 1,000 starting from Sumy Oblast and reaching Kursk city. The 2 nearest commuting routes also require at least 86 to 130 kilometers. If the salient that the Ukrainian army has captured continues to expand and when the Ukrainian army reaches the suburbs of Kursk city, then the width of the 2 flanks that need to be maintained is at least the above. Even if the number of defensive troops in the above data is cut in half to 500 people per kilometer on average, then the Ukrainian army also needs at least 65,000 people to maintain the safety of the front line. Otherwise, it is easy to be outflanked from both sides by the Russian army. In the Second Kharkov Battle of World War II, the Soviet army made such a mistake, resulting in the salient on the southern side of the Kharkov front line being surrounded by the German mechanized forces on both flanks and meeting at Izium. 200,000 Soviet troops were surrounded. In the Second Kursk Battle of World War II, the Soviet troops in the Izium salient were surrounded and lost 100,000 people in addition to the insufficient number of Ukrainian troops to maintain the front line. Western media predict that if the Ukrainian army wants to capture a large city like Kursk, the main attacking force on the front should be at least about 40,000 to 50,000 people, and about 50,000 people of reserve forces are also needed. This goal cannot be achieved simply by Ukraine making up its mind. At least the United States behind it needs to make up its mind to do it. And then it is possible. There are a large number of people who support Ukraine who think that Ukraine is trying to create an international spectacle and give the outside world the impression that the Ukrainian army has the ability to fight the Russian army to the death, so that Western countries can invest more war resources in Ukraine. But the price is too high. Many videos circulating in Telegram groups can confirm that Ukraine is currently investing real mechanized troops in Kursk. A large number of soldiers ride in armored vehicles and carry out assaults under the cover of tanks. The last time Ukraine invested an army of this level was in the large counteroffensive in spring and summer 2023. This also means that Ukraine has invested its last mechanized reserve force. The reason why Ukraine's combat operation this time is unexpected is probably that to deceive the enemy, one must first deceive oneself. Many Ukrainians and Ukraine's allies are also unaware of it. After the operation began, many frontline troops in eastern and southern Ukraine were also surprised and even expressed dissatisfaction, thinking that this is purely a gamble. Correspondingly, it is still hard to say whether the Allies will recognize Ukraine's choice and then provide more practical support to Ukraine. That is to say, on August 27, the United States announced another $125 million in weapons and equipment assistance to Ukraine. They will be distributed to Ukraine in the form of a presidential order. And weapons and equipment can be directly extracted from the U.S. military arsenal and transported to Ukraine as quickly as possible to make up for the losses of the Ukrainian army on the battlefield. However, the actual effect remains to be observed. There is also an opinion that Ukraine is to occupy a part of Russian territory to negotiate with Russia or even exchange. This idea cannot be said to be without rationality. But it is based on the premise that the initial Ukrainian army's irresistible offensive can continue and seize important areas of Kursk in one fell swoop. It should be noted that by now, as the war quickly falls into a stalemate, the Ukrainian army, as the attacker, has already built trench fortifications on the spot. In World War I, this could still be considered an offensive performance. In the 21st century, are your 20,000 modern mechanized main forces still going to launch an offensive by advancing little by little with trenches? At the same time, the Russian army in Kursk Oblast has far from turned to counterattack and is still in an obvious defensive posture. Are you to just staying put here? But there is still a reason for the Russian side to stay put. What's the point of the Ukrainian army staying put? Even if they want to make a territorial transaction, the small number of villages and towns currently occupied by the Ukrainian army are not enough as chips. If the Ukrainian army really wants to hold fast to this bit of occupied land, it actually has little significance. More importantly, no matter what the intention of the Ukrainian side is, the Russian side does not seem to attach great importance to this battle in which the Ukrainian army invaded its own territory. The reinforcements here are mainly conscripts, mercenaries and special forces in small units. The main Russian forces still continue to focus on advancing in the direction of Donetsk in eastern Ukraine as if nothing had happened even after the Ukrainian army's initial blitzkrieg achieved remarkable results and the offensive stalled. The Russian army's recent advance in eastern Ukraine may be even a little more rapid than that of the Ukrainian army attacking Kursk Oblast. Compared with the Ukrainian army not yet seeing direct hope of attacking Kursk city, the Russian army has indeed completely broken through the periphery and is approaching Krasnoarmeysk, or at least, if the Ukrainian army is playing some kind of relieving the state of Zhao by besieging the state of Wei, the Russian army is completely not buying it. On the contrary, if the Russian army is not very concerned about the invasion of Kursk and wants to finish the war in eastern Ukraine first, then this elite Ukrainian army that has entered Russian territory is in danger instead. After all, You were able to advance irresistibly at that time because there was a lack of defense in Kursk Oblast. Isn't it difficult for Ukraine to defend if Russia is difficult to defend? If the main Russian forces come to reinforce again without any worries? This Ukrainian army cannot expect the temporarily constructed trench fortifications to defend such a narrow salient under this background. The current position of the Ukrainian army, where it is difficult to advance but not retreat, is a bit abstract tactically speaking. Regardless of whether you support Russia, Ukraine or neutrality, the success of the Ukrainian army's surprise operation this time should be recognized. It's just that the subsequent development now seems a bit embarrassing. Many people compare the Kursk battle launched by Ukraine this time to the Ardennes counteroffensive, launched by the German army at the end of World War II. However, in terms of similarity, this battle is actually more like the Kaiser's battle in the later stage of World War I. The main task of the German army in the Ardennes counteroffensive was to deal a fatal blow to the Western Allies. However, due to logistical problems, it failed to achieve its ultimate goal. In contrast, in terms of the scale of troops and the level of weapons and equipment invested by Ukraine this time, only a blitzkrieg was launched by relying on airstrikes by troops within Kursk Oblast. It is impossible to reverse the overall front-end situation in eastern and southern Ukraine at all. And it is even more impossible to severely damage the Russian army. The reason why it is similar to the Kaiser's battle is not only in terms of tactics, but also because of the same difficulties faced at that time. Germany used stormtroopers to penetrate and outflank everywhere by taking advantage of the weak links in the enemy's front line. After gaining an advantage, the follow-up large troops completed the mopping up work. This tactic is exactly the same as Ukraine's tactic of using infiltration and destruction teams to penetrate everywhere, take pictures, create an omnipresent formation, and then let mechanized troops follow up and cooperate to occupy. In the Kaiser's battle, the German army occupied a large amount of land in just 4 months by relying on this tactic. But the problem is that its fragile logistics has instead accelerated Germany's destruction speed. Because the more land Germany occupies, the more resources it needs. And Germany's resources are almost exhausted if there is any difference in Ukraine's actions. It is that it is more abstract and more confusing. If I want to evaluate this operation, I would say unexpected, effective, unclear, uncertain future.